If your backstory feels flat, forced, or like a giant info dump, yeah, readers notice. And honestly, it's tanking your scenes and probably your whole novel too. That's exactly why I created my upcoming 2-day, 6-hour class called Master the Art of Backstory without info dumping or leaving your story emotionally flat. In this deep dive, I'm going to teach you everything I've learned over the past 15 years of helping writers write their novels. You'll learn the 3 types of backstory every writer should be using in their novel, the most common backstory pitfalls and how to avoid them, the 3 core principles of effective backstory, and a simple, snazzy, robust formula to slip backstory into any scene without killing your pacing. And because theory only gets you so far, we'll walk through lots of examples from best-selling and award-winning novels so you can see exactly what I'm talking about in action, how the pros pull it off, and how you can too. We'll also have a live Q&A at the end of each class, and you're welcome to stay as long as you like to get your specific backstory questions answered. Then we'll wrap everything up by breaking down the exact backstory your first 4 chapters actually need. And yes, you'll even have an opportunity to win a chance to have a scene from your novel reviewed live with an eye toward weaving in backstory that actually lands emotionally on the page. Essentially, you'll walk away knowing how to make backstory seamless, powerful, and unforgettable. The kind that keeps readers glued to your pages instead of quietly backing away. This 2-part class happens January 11th and January 18th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and the early bird pricing of $67, yes, just $67, disappears on December 14th. Seats always fill fast, so click the link in the show notes and save your spot right now. I can't wait to see you there. Hello and welcome to the Speculative Fiction Writing Made Simple podcast. I'm your host, Heather Davis. I'm a book coach, developmental editor, and fellow storyteller. And this is the show that's all about how to brainstorm, write, edit, publish, and sell a powerful speculative fiction novel. And maybe just change the world too. And today I would like to welcome the brilliant Leslye Penelope. Leslye is the award-winning author of the Earthsinger Chronicles. The first book in that series, Song of Blood and Stone, was chosen as one of Time magazine's 100 best fantasy books of all time. Equally left and right-brained, she studied filmmaking and computer science at Howard University and sometimes dreams in HTML. She hosts the My Imaginary Friends podcast, co-hosts the Ink and Magic podcast, and lives in Maryland with her feline dependents. Leslye, thank you so much for being on the show. I am super excited to chat with you today about how you go about developing a novel.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Heather. It's great.
That's my absolute pleasure. I'm so excited about this. I think your books are wonderful, and I'm a fan, so yay! This is like a little dream come true for me to have you here. All right. So to start us off, so for any listeners who might not be familiar with you or your books, can you tell us a little bit about what you write and what kind of stories you're drawn to creating?
Sure. I write fantasy and paranormal romance. I started writing romantic fantasy. Now we call it romantasy, way before it was popular. My first series was epic romantasy. And I also do more, I do like different time periods. And right now I'm doing a lot of historical fantasy with like romantic threads. But so all over sort of the speculative fiction map, but always with at least a thread of romance, if not a full romance.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. So I know that your first book, A Song of Blood and Stone, was self-published, but later it got traditionally published. Can you explain that, journey?
So I had a history of DIY. I'm also a website developer as my day job. And so I had co-founded a literary magazine many years ago. And so I had a lot of skills in terms of knowing how to create ebooks and print books and lay things out. So when I first started writing, I decided to go self-published initially. I didn't try to get an agent or an editor. And my first book came out, I self-published Song of Blood and Stone in 2015. And so that year I had several books out, and I was like doing all the marketing things, trying to get anyone who could to see this and know it existed. And one day, about a year after the publication of that book, so there were 2 books out in the series of a planned 4-book series. I got an email through my website from an editor at St. Martin's Press, and she had seen my self-published books. Initially, she asked me to pitch her something new, which is usually what you would do, because it's not, at that time especially, it wasn't very common to get your self-published books republished by a Big 5 traditional publisher. But eventually, that is actually what she wanted to do. And so I thought about it, because it required taking the books off the market for what ended up being a year.
Oh, wow.
And I decided that, even though that was a long time, and I was building momentum, the opportunity to expose the books to a wider audience kind of won out. So I did that. They were republished in 2018, and I kept the rights to self-published novellas in the series. So it ended up being 4 full-length novels with St. Martin's Press and 3 novellas that I self-published. So it's a 7-book series. And that's how I got started. And so I'm still hybrid. I still do fantasy novels with Big 5 presses, and I still self-publish. These days, I'm mostly self-publishing my stranger paranormal romance or kind of urban fantasy romance kind of stories.
So that's amazing. That's like everyone's dream. Like the publishers will come knocking on their door. Like,
Right.
it's so good. Someone has to knock on your door. So that makes me, obviously you had the writing chops to do traditional publishing. So what made you decide in the beginning that you weren't even, it's not like you went that route and it wasn't successful. It's like you just didn't, you decided against it. Why did you make that decision in the beginning?
Yeah, because so my first book is, as I mentioned, epic fantasy, romance. At that time, like that mix wasn't super popular.
Mm.
And also my cast of characters are all Black and brown.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wasn't seeing traditional publishers, publishing stories like mine. And I had heard some horror stories from authors of color who had terrible experiences, editors wanting to change their work or not thinking that it was authentic. And I didn't want to go through any of that. So since I had that sort of DIY experience, I was like, well, people are being successful self-publishing. I can find an audience, I think, on my own, and I won't have to go through any of these things that I'd heard many other authors talk about. And interestingly enough, the editor who contacted me was a Black woman editor. Mm-hmm. And so I haven't had any of those horrible experiences that I was afraid of in traditional publishing. I know that many people have, but I've been very lucky so far in my career. But yeah, I still I'm also a control freak. And so, I've worked with designers before in my work doing websites, and I've worked with, other editors. So I was confident that I'd be able to do like a professional product, and keeping that control is always nice. One of obviously the downsides of traditional publishing is I have to relinquish so much control, from the titles to the covers to all of that stuff. So having a little space, why I'm still hybrid is having that space where I can still exercise those chops. I have control over everything, and it sort of rises and falls based on me.
And so you said you still have control over being able to publish shorter works in your same universe. Was that to help build like an audience for marketing purposes? Like, why did you want to hold on to that ability?
Yeah, initially when I did the deal for that first series with St. Martin's Press, I had said, well, I envisioned these books, but I wanted to do these shorter stories to connect the novels. Mm-hmm. And at one point they were interested in publishing them through their ebook arm. And then they decided they didn't want to, but I kept in my contract that I still could. And so it was just the vision for the series that I had. It is a little difficult to market them, when they're not being marketed by the press. So I have it all over my website, but it was really more so for the story, because I had this in my mind that I wanted these stories that are kind of like prequels to each of the novella that it comes, the novel that it comes before.
I love that so much, so that you can still, even if you are doing traditional publishing, you can really have that creative control over the bigger world of your story, which I know is something that writers worry about, like, mm-hmm. That they worry about losing all of that control, but you still have it. Is that something that, and maybe you're not sure about this, but is that something that is common that writers can have that creative control over, like novellas and short works around their series?
I've seen other authors do it. It's not really common. You do have to negotiate for that in your contract, and every contract negotiation is different. There's things that I've tried to get that I couldn't, that friends of mine have gotten in their contracts. So it's really case by case. And at that time, I didn't have an agent. So I did the contract with St. Martin's with a literary attorney, and who was great. And so it works a little bit like an agent in terms of my attorney agreed to take a percentage as opposed to me paying her exorbitant, many hundreds of dollars an hour fee. I would, now my agent gets 15% of the deals. So you can, if you don't have an agent and you're looking to do a deal, you can get a literary attorney, and some of them will take percentages so that you don't have to come out of pocket to pay them, which was extremely helpful. And so yeah, she negotiated that expertly and allowed me to keep those rights.
I just love that you were so savvy going into it, that you knew that you would need a literary attorney, even when, a press approached you and like, was this dream come true? So it's kind of about keeping your head and knowing what your best moves are in a process.
I think so many writers, they want to be chosen, and that's very validating, and there's nothing wrong with that, but making sure that, okay, this is a business decision. It's like, yes, I've been chosen. Oh my goodness, it's my dream coming true. But at the same time, they're going to have these rights to publish your book for the next 70 years and plus. And there's money involved. So you really have to put your business hat on, and having an attorney, having advice, doing the research is vital in that process.
I love that. And what ended up coming out of this, eventually your novel got chosen to be one of the 100 best fantasy novels of all time. I just have to unpack that. Like, how did that feel? Like, if you were to ask me what's my biggest dream, like it would be on a list like that. So how did that feel, that validation?
Yeah, I remember I found out because I was subscribed to one of those services that lets you know when the internet is talking about you. Like, I had my name in there, my book names, and it said Time Magazine has chosen. And I was like, that doesn't sound real. It sounded like I thought it was spam. I'm like, is that the real Time Magazine, or is it like Our Times Magazine or something like that? Yeah. And then I looked it up and I'm like, oh no, it's the real Time Magazine, and you're on this list. And I was just gobsmacked. I mean, you can't imagine how shocked I was. And yeah, it's amazing. It's just, it's indescribable, like that kind of recognition. On my first book, people are always like, oh, you shouldn't publish your first book, or there's all these things that you hear. And I mean, I did go through many edits for the self-published version, and, again, trying to make it as professional as possible, taking it very seriously. And then eventually I did another edit when St. Martin's picked it up. So there are technically like 3 versions of this book out in the world, if people still have the original self-published version. But I worked very hard on it. And so, publishing specifically is not really a meritocracy. It's not like the best book wins. There's so much luck that's involved. There's timing that's involved. And so for that particular book at that particular time, people were able to see it. And, and I got that on that list, which was amazing. Yeah,
that's so amazing. It's awesome. And I love what you were saying about the editing that you went through, even when you were or self-publishing. Can you explain like what that looked like to you when you were thinking about, hey, I want this to be a business, I want to be a writer, and I want it to be professional? What did you invest in?
Yeah, that's a great question because, this is the earlier days. I wasn't at the forefront, but I started writing this, my first book in 2013. And so in 2014, I was editing it, and I was a member of, at the time it was Yahoo groups, now they're basically all Facebook groups, but with other writers. And I knew that I wanted to do the editing. And so while I was in the process of revising the novel, I was also researching publication. And so I learned about the 3 kinds of editing. And so there's developmental editing, copy editing, or line editing, which are often conflated or interchangeable, and then proofreading. So I set my budget. I was like, I want to get all the levels of editing that a professional published book would get. And I looked for editors who were recommended on these author groups that I was a member of. And what I did was once I had a version that I thought was editable, I did the sample edits with about 5 different editors. And so they took either like 5 to 10 pages, sometimes the first chapter, sometimes they're free, or sometimes they have a small charge for their time, and just tried to find an editor who was a good fit for me, who I liked their style, I liked their comments. I felt like they kind of understood what I was trying to do. And so I went through the developmental edit, which was extremely difficult. It's the first time it was our first novel I'd ever finished. And so I was new. I didn't really know what I was doing. I had read lots of craft books, and I'd been writing since I was a child, but writing your first novel, it's going to be not amazing the first couple of drafts.
Yeah.
So I went through that process. I did a huge rewrite then, and then I went through the copy edits. And I also did beta readers before that. I was in a writing group at the time, and I had like probably too many beta readers. I had 10 beta readers. And I was like, when you have that many, you're like, people are giving you conflicting advice and you're not sure what to do.
Yeah.
But so yeah, the first step was the beta readers. Then when I figured all that out, I went to a developmental editor, copy edits, proofread. And yeah, so I set, the budget that I could afford and got price, part of the figuring out editors is like, who can I afford, and whose style matches mine. And at the same time, I was researching cover designers and things like that. So a lot of research and a lot of getting recommendations from other people and people knew or didn't know books that I liked. You can look in the acknowledgments of a book and see if they thank their editor. And if you really liked that book, maybe, and it was a similar style or similar thematically or genre to what you're writing, then maybe that's a good editor for you to try. But yeah, that was my process of trying to get a really good, solid product at the end.
I love that you really wanted to go through all the same levels of editing that you would get traditionally. So it is a very professional product. I think so many writers very often don't realize how much is involved, and that sometimes you have to invest, right? You do have to invest in order to make your work as strong as possible so that it can go out there no matter where you want it to land, right? And engage readers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So with that, what does your writing practice look like now? Like, what do your days look like? Can you tell me? Like, so you said, is this your day job now, or do you also have a day job that you are doing at the same time?
I own my own business. So I do still have my website development business, and it's part-time, for the past, I don't know how many years. So basically I split my time. In the mornings I write, and because accountability is so helpful and actually has become necessary for me, I write online with other writers 4 days a week. So we usually meet around 8 a.m. and we write till about noon. And it's been an ever-changing group of people, but there's two core people, one of my best friends since college and I, and we open it up to our friends. And so that's been really helpful. And so, yeah, usually the first half of my day is, if I'm writing, I'm focused on the words. If I'm sort of in between, then there's the other million admin tasks that it takes to be an author. And then I have lunch, and then usually I switch to my other business in the afternoons. And then on Fridays, we don't meet, but I usually still try to I use Fridays as my marketing and admin day, depending on if I'm on deadline or not. And so I end up writing about, between 4 and 6 days a week. Again, if I'm on deadline, I add those extra couple of days so that I can just focus on everything. Right now, I'm not on deadline, so I take it a little bit easier on myself, knowing that, you can't be full throttle all the time. You really have to. I've been on a constant journey of trying to be kinder to myself. And yeah, I don't enjoy the marketing stuff, but that has to happen. So I try to schedule that in later in the day or in the evenings.
And as far as the marketing piece, is it the same for your traditionally published works as your self-published? Do you put as much effort in, or do you really count that the traditional publishing, they'll do the marketing for you there?
Yeah, even with a traditional publisher, you have to do so much marketing yourself. And it depends, of course, on the publishing house and your sort of cachet with them as an author. They will, they don't give everybody the same treatment. So as a mid-lister, I'm doing a lot of stuff myself. So a lot of it is similar in terms of my newsletter, the small amount of social media that I do, I kind of approach it the same way. The differences with my self-published stuff is, of course, the price changing and running sales, doing advertising in the email newsletters. I don't personally do a lot of Facebook advertising for my self-published books, but I've gone through phases of doing ads, but I will run a sale on the first in the series and then do a promotion, try to get a BookBub deal, things like that, do all the other email lists, newsletter things, group promotions. So yeah, there's additional things that I definitely do for my self-published books that don't necessarily make sense for traditionally published, especially when you can't see, running ads on TradPub books. You have no idea if they're working or not. There's no idea what the ROI is. So I tend not to do that. But otherwise, yeah, sort of the day-to-day marketing and just letting people know that these books exist and that, it's a good idea if you want to read them. that I approach the same.
Nice. And so you said you write from 8 a.m. till noon. And so you obviously write to an amount of time. Do you also concern yourself with word count in that time? Or are you really more relaxed about word count and just say, if I put my time in, that's what matters?
it ends up being putting the time in. I do have a schedule. So since I am often on deadline, I do have a system where I schedule things out. And so I am less word count and more like the number of scenes or chapters, depending on how my outline has gone, or the number of bullet points on my outline if I haven't figured out what the chapters are going to be yet. And I've gotten the ability to sort of predict, okay, I think I can do these 2 scenes this morning. And so if I haven't gotten them, and depending on the rest of my workload, I will push the writing schedule out a little bit longer. But usually I'm stopping at the halfway point because I'm also tired. Like, it's like you could only do so much. I can only do so much creative work a day before I just feel exhausted. And that ends up being about 4 hours. So if I've been on task, then yeah, it's mostly the time. And then again, if the deadline is coming up and I'm not meeting those milestones that I thought, then I'm pushing harder and I'm adding another day. I found that 7 days a week doesn't work for me in terms of writing. I need a day or else I will burn out. But I do work on the weekends, not just when I'm on deadline, to make sure that I'm not going to be rushing, ideally, when I get to the deadline.
That makes sense. I love that you build in sort of rest time from the creative pursuit, because I know when I'm writing, I feel the same way. Like if I write every single day, it definitely burnout comes, even because you don't think it will, because you're like, oh, but I want to spend time in my world. But even so it takes a lot of concentration.
And there's so much decision fatigue, making all the decisions about what's happening and something's not working now. I've got to dissect it and figure out where I went wrong. So all of that mental energy, like your brain is burning all these calories. So.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So how long does it take you, like from idea to finished draft that you're then like getting ready to push out to your agent or, to a whatever editor you use at this point? Like, how long does that take you and how many drafts do you go through?
Yeah, I think a good average is probably about 9 months-ish. And my books tend to be long. So my fantasy books, my traditionally published books are all like 100 to 130,000 words. There's one that's 150,000. And so the version that I give, my first drafts internally are very short. They're half the size of, half the length of what it ends up being. And then I go through the revision process. And then my self-published works tend to be a bit shorter, like 70, 80,000 words for a full-length novel. So, yeah, and it depends on the complexity. But I would say about 9 to 10 months for me working on like the plotting process. I'm a plotter. So I'm going through a lot of, the brainstorming, the plotting, the world building, all of that first draft. And in terms of drafts, I believe in fast drafting. So my first draft, I write as quickly as possible, like NaNoWriMo style, just try to dump everything out because I know I'm going to be refining it so much. And so that I can usually get out in a month. That's my goal for like a full length first draft is just really as quickly as possible. And then it's probably the next draft is the cleaning up. And then I would do 3 drafts on my own before I send it to someone else, because I think that's how long it takes for me to actually figure out what the story was. That first draft, I'm learning the characters. I'm learning the story. There's a lot of gaps. That second draft is trying to fill in the gaps. And then the third draft is really polishing it so another human being can read it.
Oh, I love that. I love it. So with all that, so you finally are down to like a system of, exactly how long it's going to take you to bring something forward.
Yeah. That's every book is a little bit different, but it ends up being about that. And it's been pretty consistent. I think I'm on like 16 or 17 books. So it's been pretty consistent the last few years.
I love that. And so you said that you're a plotter. Can you explain like what kind of plotting do you do? Do you do like, is there a particular system that you love? What do you do?
Yeah. So I have a bachelor's degree in film production. So I sort of come back to, and I talked about on my podcast this last time, my work in progress right now, I'm writing the first draft as a script, as a screenplay, just it's something different. And it really gets the process to its purest form, just like, okay, a dialogue and action, like what is happening. Yeah. So in terms of plotting, I like Save the Cat, which starts out as a screenwriting.
Yes.
But there's also Save the Cat Writes a Novel by Jessica Birdie, which helps you take that like very rigid screenplay format, because screenplays are much more rigid than novels, and make it into a novel. That's one of my go-tos. I also love all of K.M. Weiland's books. So How to Structure Your Novel. There's certain ones that kind of stay on my desk. And the third one that is not as much structure, but Write Your Novel from the Middle by James Scott Bell,
Yeah.
which is very helpful. And if you know the midpoint, he has this idea of the mirror moment that happens at the midpoint. And the midpoint in a lot of plotting systems is a little kind of murky. Like there's different ways it's described. So that one is another one that I absolutely love. So I'll get to Save the Cat. Now, Save the Cat has like 15 or 16 steps. Before then, that's what I'm trying to work towards. I use Dan Wells' 7-point story structure, which since it's 7 points, it's easier to start with less and then expand to get to more. So I want just the big picture plot points. And once I figure those out, then I expand that into the Save the Cat plot points. And then from there, I'm going into my bulleted outline of everything that happens, and then my synopsis, which is more of a descriptive version of everything that happens. And that's the general plotting process. But then that's, you add in a little bit of story grid here and there, which is a book by Sean Coyne.
Yeah, I feel the urge to say on the podcast that I did not specifically ask Leslye on simply because she's going to name all the same books that I love and that I use with my clients. I'm like, it's like, I've got story grid over here. I've got like Right from the Middle. I've got Save the Cat. I'm always talking about Save the Cat. So I'm like, yay, this is so cool though.
That's amazing. Yeah. These are the go-tos. Like this is where I start. But I love reading craft books and learning about new systems. I read John Truby's, the 22, what is that book called? I forgot. The John Truby Anatomy of Story.
Yes, I've got it right back there. Yep.
Yeah. And that one is a lot for me. I don't really follow his system, but I really appreciated reading the book and getting his perspective on storytelling. Yeah. But I do find myself going back to Save the Cat and going back to these 7-point, just something a little simpler that I can wrap my head around and try to figure out if my story will fit into that.
I love that because when I work with writers, when they're kind of at those early stages and they probably don't have a full vision of what their first draft is going to be, it's kind of more in I think this is going to happen. I usually we start with the story spine from Pixar. That's very once. I love that. And then we take that and we expand it into Save the Cat. So same idea. It's the same basic thing. You start with a much simpler version, and then that allows you to gain the clarity on like where it might fit into a bigger structural type of thing.
Which makes so much sense.
Quite fun. All right. So, okay. So let me see here. I know there was something. Okay. So I'm gonna have to cut that part out. Okay. So when you say that you, do you do scene by, once you get Save the Cat and you're like, you've got your major beats in your novel, do you go all the way to scene outlining, or is it more of a flexible, like creative container that you've built for yourself and then you kind of play around in scenes?
So I do try to do a scene by scene outline. That is the goal. And then I turn the outline into a full synopsis so I can read through it. My synopsis ends up being anywhere from like 11 to 20 pages, depending on the length of the book. Because that allows me, it's like the first time I'm telling myself the story. Mm-hmm. And then the first draft, the fast draft is also telling myself the story. However, usually the last half and often the last third is very murky. It's like, and then they fix the problems. And, I will figure that out once I've written the first half, because I can get to the midpoint pretty consistently with my outline. And then by the time I get to the midpoint, I'm like, I've discovered things and things have changed and shifted. So I have to re-plot, re-outline. And sometimes I have to do that another time once I get to maybe the break into Act 3, things, are a little bit murky. So as much as I love plotting and I need to plot, I understand that first plot is never going to be completely the thing that I write. And that as I'm going through the process of doing that first draft and learning the characters, and then they're going to go off in different directions than I thought they would, I try to follow that. And so it's kind of both. It's like I do the scene outline, but I'm still leaving that room for discovery and for understanding what's actually happening and for it to shift and change in ways that I hadn't anticipated.
I love that. And that is what I have certainly found with my own work and with the clients that I work with, the idea of you want as much of the outline as possible, right? So you can have clarity on the trajectory of where you're going, but inevitably it is going to be so much different. Even if you write a really great outline, right? You're going to be discovering things.
Yeah.
So you have to write that first draft, or you don't actually know even what you want to shape the story into for real until you're looking back. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So since you do a lot of plotting, how do you feel? I mean, what do you do as far as character development? Do you plot out a character arc? Do you do like interviews with your characters and write out worksheets? Like, how do you handle getting, I mean, obviously we get to know our characters through the scenes that we write, but what do you do before you actually start the writing?
Yeah, I do some light character work. So before I do the first draft, I will try to figure out their goals, their wounds. I use onestopforwriters.com, which is the online version of all the emotion thesaurus and the negative character thesaurus. It's got a bunch of different thesauruses on that website. And they've got a lot of great tools too. So they have an emotional wound thesaurus and a character motivation thesaurus. And I'll try to identify those things for the characters. I'll also try to identify their enneagrams, because that's what I use for their personalities. And for the main character, I will try to get as much of their arc, their internal and their external arcs as possible. But I'm fine leaving a bunch of those things blank, like not quite knowing exactly what's going to happen. So it's like, I don't do interviews. I don't do like intense, like backgrounds, histories. I just try to get what I need to know for the first draft. And then between drafts 1 and 2, I'll go back and I'll do more detailed work. I still am not a huge fan of like interviewing them or like figuring out what their favorite breakfast cereal is and like these long questionnaires, because I don't need to know that information. But
right, that's distracting information. It doesn't matter. I know when I work with writers, we answer questions about our character, like what's their decision making style? You know, like how are they going to be? Like, I don't care what your favorite color is. I do care, you know, what kind of a decision maker you are, because that plays out on the page.
Right. And then things like, there's a character builder on the One Stop for Writers site that I love. It's much more detailed, but it's things like, how do they respond to stress? You know, like it digs into the wound and how they responded to those wounding events. I figure out the lie, you know, the false belief. I think it's Michael Haig has his journey, his character journey. So those things. And so knowing more about that, any kind of secrets they have, any quirks they have, trying to figure out their tics, you know, what do they do when they're under stress or when they're worried or when they're afraid, those kinds of things that I think are much more important. And then also their, you know, positive traits, negative traits, those things, how do other people see them? So that's the character work. And then it's continually refined as I continue revising the drafts.
I love that. And so you were talking a minute ago, like about the misbelief, and that leads me to the question of, when you start a novel, do you already know kind of what message you want that novel, like what the big point of what you're writing is, or is that something that you discover along the way?
I don't think I know entirely. Like with some books, like my last traditionally published book is Daughter of the Merciful Deep. I knew that I wanted to write something about guilt and self-forgiveness. And so sometimes I'll have the basic theme. And it also depends on the inspiration for the book or for the story. But yeah, a lot of times that is discovered along the way. It's like, I know I'll have some idea about a character or a place I want to write about, like a world, a magic system, however the inspiration comes to me. And then as throughout the research process and the plotting process, I'll be like, oh, this book is about finding your place in the world, finding your family, or trusting yourself again. Like, okay. And then that actually is very helpful in honing it during the revision phases, where it's like, okay, if it doesn't relate to that, I mean, you know, I keep things in, but like keeping that as your North Star for like, okay, making all of these decisions that you have to make. If I know at the end of the day, if I know that, you know, I want people to walk away with a feeling about being able to forgive yourself if you've done something wrong and getting over guilt, then that's going to help me figure out what the characters do and how my character is going to overcome the antagonist.
I love that. Absolutely. Holding like the message. I know that's been so helpful for the writers I work with as well, and myself in my own work, like that, you know, the idea of it really helps you revise. It really helps you to see what scenes and subplots maybe aren't, you know, are fun and interesting for you, but aren't really adding to the major thing that you're trying to say about the world. So
right,
I really
exactly.
love that.
Yeah.
I love that. So so you do a lot of rich and wonderful and beautiful world building. Your stories are so creative. How do you go about world building? What is that for you?
For me, world building is really asking a lot of questions and trying to figure out how to answer them in a way that fits with the story that I'm telling. So when I talk about plotting includes the world building for me. I don't really separate them. Like sometimes, yeah, like if I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's the magic system? Then it's answering that question. Okay, what kind of magic is it? Really relates directly to the character that I have and the problem that they're trying to solve. And, how they can solve these problems with the magic. Does the magic cause more problems? How do you learn it? So yeah, I'm writing something brand new right now and just, doing the first drafting. And so coming right out of all of this world building. And I did for this particular story, the world came to me first. It's like, oh, I want to do a world where this type of magic exists and this in this setting. And so then it was like, oh, who is the character and what's the problem? What is actually the plot? And then I was like, okay, I'm doing this mystery plot. So I need to figure out how the magic is going to interact with how they're going to solve the mystery with the magic, or how does the magic hinder them in solving the mystery? And then sort of the greater forces in the world. I want this story to be about people who are being exploited for their magic. And so that goes into all of the other world building details. What is the government like? What is the history? What is the education system like? How do societal pressures? What are you expected to do in your family? Like, what are the gender roles? Things like that. But it's all connected to the story that I want to tell. And so I'll be like, okay, here's the plot. My character's going to go here and going to have this problem. And that brings me back to a world building issue. Because in order to figure out what the problem is and the tensions there, I have to know the world. And I figure that out and they go back to the plot and the character. So it's really going back and forth between plot, character, and world in order to create something that weaves them together so that everything matters. It's not just like this cool world with all these great things that you can look at and none of it really matters for the story. I like to have everything be really tightly integrated and woven together. So I go through the world building checklist that I have and kind of see, do I know a little bit about all of these details, economics, agriculture, food, art, and, maybe have a note about every little thing or just keep it in my mind. But then when I have to go deeper, I want the depth to be connected to the story and to the character arc.
Okay, so you would say for writers who are out there struggling with world building that it's good to have a checklist, which we'll talk about. You're offering your wonderful checklist later. We'll talk about that. But it's great to have a checklist, and that's sort of that first layer. Just know this at first so you start to get to know your world, but then there's going to be a lot more work. You need to go much deeper. And how do you know where to go deeper?
Yeah. So, even on the checklist, there's things that I don't know and I don't need to know until maybe I'll need to know in chapter 40, but I don't know right now. So I like to do it as little as possible because, world building, it's fun. But there's so many people who get lost in world building and don't actually end up with a finished, completed story. So you don't want to get lost. So in terms of not doing that, only world build what you need. If there's no need, I think there was a story where I didn't understand the law enforcement system until very late because no one interacted with law enforcement and that wasn't relevant to the story. So something like that where, there's things that are going to affect the daily life of the character. They're going to affect the journey of the character and the struggle that they're going through. That is what you focus on. And then again, going back to theme, if there is a theme that you want to explore in the story, then how does the world reflect that theme? And how do, maybe you focus heavily on the economic system because, your magic is a sort of an economy and you've got to barter for power or something like that. And you focus less on where they're getting their food from because it's just less important. Or you have a story where it's all about resources and food and water and they're living in a desert and they need these things. You have to know exactly how they get these resources and something else is less important because they're not going to get higher education. So the university system is not something you have to delve into. So really, I just try to focus it. And the other things come in for color to make the world 3D. So, that's why I kind of say go through the checklist, have a little bit of an idea about things that you can mention the opera or you can mention this game that you made up that's, that everybody plays because that makes the world feel real and like a good fantasy world. But we don't have to know the rules of your version of 4D chess, unless it's important.
For sure. Yeah. So basically world building comes in, you in order to not get stuck in it, you do it on an as needed basis. You can drop in details. And then when you know you need to focus on it to make something make sense, that's when you do the work, not as a procrastination tool.
Exactly. Yeah. It can be a fun procrastination tool. And yeah, so when I do the deep dives, it's like when I've encountered a problem that I need to solve with the world. I need to really understand the mechanics of the history of how we got, who's in power and how they got there, because it's vitally important. And when it's not, just keep it moving.
I love that so much. So you mentioned magic systems. So magic systems are notoriously hard to write well. Do you have any rules or tips for people? Like, how do you create something that's really spectacular and fun and new, but not make it so overpowered that you can't work with it in a easy way?
Yeah, I've been writing standalones recently, and it's been fun because I get to kind of recreate magic systems each time. And there's pros and cons to that, but it does let me exercise that. So, I think that I do have like a little system. I think it's in the checklist too. Sort of magic has, is it thought, speech, gesture, material? Like how do you do it? Mm-hmm. What does it do? What is the cost? There's questions that I answer about the magic. And I'm trying to create magic systems that, I'm always doing research on real life cultures and societies and belief systems. My past few books, I've been delving into different kinds of like African-based systems, and when people from Africa were brought to the Americas, how those things transformed and changed depending on where they were and the other cultures and religions and belief systems they encountered, and then doing kind of versions of those in my magic systems. For Earthsinger Chronicles, which is my epic fantasy, it was, kind of based on like metaphysics a little bit, so I do a lot of research on physics because I'm just interested in it. And that can come through in a magical system in a way that looks nothing like physics, but like that was my inspiration.
Right.
So I'm always trying to ground it in something. Like I'll take some idea. Like I have a series that is, contemporary, or it's like a dystopian paranormal romance with shifters. And I had read something about this culture in Africa that believes in 3 souls. And so I was like, oh, well, in this series, everyone has 3 souls. And so that's part of the magic system that was based on just something that I read. I'm not obviously doing their culture, but I've taken it into a fantasy world. So my advice to people is to find some grounding, whether it's in your culture or something that you've researched or science or, nature. Find a grounding element and then build from there. That can be a way that you can create something unique and new that people haven't seen before. And then, figure out, I think in general, magic should have some kind of cost. I like a harder system that you can kind of define. Mm-hmm. A lot of people like softer magic where it's just more like woo-woo, hand wavy. And that's perfectly fine too, because people love that. Figure out like what you like. But I do try to make sure the reader can understand the magic system so that they know when I use it, it's not going to be Deus Ex Machina. It's not going to be, the magic just came in and solved things. You really want to set it up and set up whatever system you're doing so that it, even on a second read, you can be like, oh, okay, I can see how that could have happened. So it's not coming out of nowhere.
I know when I spoke to KJ Delantonia about magic systems, one of the things she said about, she always wants to make sure that her magic is causing as many problems or more than it's solving. Is that something that you try and weave into yours, that it's not just going to come in there and be the...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I do want the magic to cause problems, and even if it's just sort of like emotionally for the characters, like the weight of having to do this, or maybe it's a burden in the same, at the same time that it's a boon. In my book, The Monsters We Defy, the magic system, there's a charm and a trick. There's like a good thing and a bad thing that comes whenever you've been given this power. So it automatically comes with a very negative consequence that the plot is they're trying to get rid of their magic because they are, as much as the good thing, the charm is good, they really, their lives have been negatively impacted by the trick. And so that could be part of your plot as well. If you have, and so that balance, the duality of magic, I think that it's important. Like for modern stories, modern readers, they don't want just magic that just solves everything. I think it's more interesting and people are more savvy now, having read so much fantasy and consumed so much fantasy media, that's an expectation too.
Yeah, absolutely. So that brings me to one of my final questions for you, which is, what are you working on right now? Can you tell us about it? What are you in the process of writing?
Yeah. So I have a book that I'm going to be looking at the copy edit soon that comes out next August of 2026, which is a contemporary 1999. So it's my Y2K fantasy book about a young woman sees her sister getting into a car with a stranger, and moments later, no one, even their mother, remembers her twin sister ever existed.
Ooh.
And so it's set during the Y2K crisis, and it's called The Inevitable Undoing of Zahara Douglas. And so, yeah, really excited about that.
I love the way you name your novels. It's so good. It just immediately, it's like a curiosity. So like, what?
Right.
How long? So, okay, that was like my third to last question, which is, how do you come up with these great names? Because they're just so good.
The titles, yeah, I do a lot of brainstorming, like for most of them. Some of them come easily. Like I have a book called Savage City that just popped into my head. Whereas for A Song of Blood and Stone, I brainstormed like 150 titles,
Yeah.
For this one, The Inevitable Undoing, my publisher and I, we kind of brainstormed, went back and forth, thinking through like all these different titles. So a lot of it is just, I start listing out titles while I'm writing. So I keep a separate document in Scrivener with just, okay, whenever I have a title idea, I put it in there. And so, that's part of the thing, just thinking through all these different options and then talking to my friends. And if it's a traditionally published book, my editor and other people at the publisher are involved in that too. So, yeah.
So you get people to kind of weigh in on like, hey, here are my top 10 and what do you think's good? Yeah.
And especially people who I've been talking to the book about, who know the basic the themes or the synopsis of the book. Like, does this sound right? And you want it to be genre specific. You want people I like that if it asks a question or if it makes people lean in, like you said, like, hey, I want to know more about that. The title and the cover, all they have to do is make you want to read the back cover copy, which hopefully will make you want to read the book.
Awesome. Well, I know every time I've read a title of one of your books, I'm like, I must read that absolutely right now. They're so good. So good.
Thank you.
So if you could give writers one piece of advice, like if they're struggling with their writing, if they don't know their direction, like what would you say? What's the best piece of advice you could give them?
If they're struggling, I think for me, community has been so important. And, it can be difficult, especially since so many of us are introverts, but we're writing alone. And whenever I'm struggling with a plot or like a title or, something, I have a group of people that I can go to and be like, hey, this is what's happening. Can I talk this through? What do you think about this? So having some kind of community, whether it's a writing group, online, in person, genre based, there's so many different ways to find that. But that's really been so, so, so important to every step of my journey. I created a mastermind of some of my writer friends, and we meet every week, and we have done for many years, just to bounce ideas off of each other and things like that. So if any way you can find a community of other people who are going through what you're going through, that is going to be very vital in this career.
I think that's such great advice. I have always seen writers, and myself included, become much more successful in getting words on the page and just not feeling overwhelmed by a process that is in fact just overwhelming. It's so big, right? You're creating an entire world.
Exactly.
So that's wonderful. And so you have a little gift for anyone who's interested in world building. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I have a free world building checklist. It's the one that I use to go over that we've been talking about. So yeah, you can download that and use it in your projects. And I hope that it is helpful for everyone.
Yeah, it's great. I downloaded it, my gosh, months ago when you were first on my summit. It's wonderful, guys. You should go get it. And the link to that will be right in the show notes. So go down there and click on that and get Leslie's wonderful, wonderful checklist. All right, Leslye, thank you so, so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it. I've learned so much.
Oh, thank you, Heather. Yeah, it's been amazing.
Okay, my friends, that's it for today. Please take a moment to follow the podcast and share it with a writer friend. It would help the podcast grow, and it might even help your friend make a writing breakthrough. So that's a win-win situation if you ask me. Until next time, keep writing, keep dreaming, and remember, the world needs your stories right now. So don't you dare give up on your novel or yourself. Talk soon.